Amen. Good singing tonight, guys. That was good. We're in Zechariah chapter 6, Zechariah 6 tonight. Switch over to the lapel, but Scott, excuse me. I don't know if batteries have been changed out recently, so if it goes out, I'll jump to this one. So just wave or something. All right, that song. So that second song was not that the first song was bad. I chose the first song primarily for one event that happens in the passage we're going to be at tonight. But that second one was just powerful as I'm listening to what you all are singing, and I didn't have a hymn book with me, so I guessed about 50% of it. I was mostly right. But then just listening to what that means and just the great plan that God has, and to know that there's nothing's going to stop him. In fact, I love the rebuke against Satan in that song, talking about that one word will fell him. The idea of fell is like when you fell a tree, you cut down a tree, just one word. That's all it takes. God knocks him down. So anyways, that's good. So thank you for that. Zechariah 6. I hope you guys are having a good day. I had lasagna for dinner tonight, so it's been a great day. I'm enjoying it. All right, we had a good time with door to door today. We didn't get very far. What was it? 4 doors, 5 doors? But man, just an opportunity to share the gospel with a few people, with a Muslim guy who a few things at the end, which was a neat thing. But at the end of the conversation, we gathered a few things. One is that he did believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, God the Son, and that he knew that if he didn't get saved, that he said, I might do this later when I think about it. And then he said right after that, maybe I better do this now because I might die later. And so I thought that's pretty wise. And then I was able to lead him in a prayer. So we pray for him. His name, Sure. Sharik. Yeah, that was his last name. Yes, Sharik was his last name. All right. So anyways, in our defense, it was a hard name. Okay, so it was just challenging. So, what's that? Sharik. All right, so Sharik. I appreciate that. As we were talking, I kept on trying to remember that name. That was harder. So anyways, we rejoiced in that one. Then another lady had a chance to talk to. Her name was Karen, and his Mexican lady, or not Mexican, Nicaraguan, I believe, and had a chance to share the gospel with her. She had said that she had made a profession already, but her church was telling her that she wouldn't go to heaven because she was living in a sin with her current relationship and had not been baptized yet, and so she would go to hell. And so anyways, we went back to this is what the gospel is. The gospel is that Jesus died, was buried, and rose again. That's it. You should not be living in sin. You should make sure you get baptized. But those are not saving works. And so anyway, so it was good. It was a good time of ministry to them. We have to remember that with when we're out there, our goal in preaching is not just that people get saved. That's a good thing. But the gospel ministry goes beyond people trusting Christ as Savior. It's how do you continue in that? And so as far as not continue to be saved, well, obviously that's going to be something the Lord takes care of. He's the one that keeps them saved. But we continue to bring people to a life that's consistent with the gospel in which they believed. All right, so Zechariah chapter number 6. Zechariah chapter 6 is going to end. It's going to be the last of the 8 visions. Now, I realized as I was getting ready I think it was yesterday, I was thinking about this specific thought, is I use the word visions pretty frequently, and I got thinking, why do we use the word visions? Like, why do we tell people visions? And so I've been going through the 8 visions, and there's nothing specifically says, and then I got a vision and said, there are some references to vision, but more so, in the Old Testament, many of the prophecies were considered what we were called visions. For instance, Saul, King Saul, that is, when we see him in 1 Samuel, he's traveling to go find his lost animals. And anyways, he goes to an area, and his helper tells him that there is a seer here. And the idea is one that sees visions, is one not just like random visions, but literally these would be words of the Lord or prophecies that God would give and some insight into the future. So the visions had to do specifically of things of the future. These would be prophecies of things that were going to happen. And so the reason we call it that is it seems to be some indication, especially back in chapter number 3 and 4, that this may have been while he was sleeping. One night's worth, 8 visions, just one after another, because of one of them, he wakes up and he's as one that was woken up out of a deep sleep. In other words, he was You know what it is like, you know what I mean? You get up in the middle of a deep sleep and you know you're there, but are you? You know, and that's he's got that as well. But they are visions in the sense that it's not just where he's been transported to see the future. For instance, John in the book of Revelation, he is brought up into heaven and shown what's going to happen. Whereas here, he's given a vision of the future that is depicted in a prophetic manner in regards to its writing, something that was going to be symbolic of things that were going on. Another part of this, as we're finishing these eight visions, is that the visions are also, or the prophecies that are given, have multiple fulfillments. And what I mean by that is that there is a very real fulfillment that's taking place back then. And this is what now, remember the timeline, they've come back from Babylon, they started building the temple, the foundation is complete, they're already doing the sacrifice, they have somewhat of a Levitical system that is in play, they're doing what they're supposed to, but not with the right heart, and they have not finished building the temple, and it seems like it'd be too hard. In fact, based on some of what we're seeing here, it's lining up then with Ezra, where they're describing some of the challenges, and even Nehemiah, where there's challenges from the outside, and they're kind of scared to finish building the temple because it might be too hard. And so Zechariah chapter number 8 is going, Zechariah chapter number 6 is going to summarize, like, do what you're supposed to, and here's why, because I'm with you, and I win, so don't worry about the losers, if you will. And what I mean by that, the world loses, and so don't be afraid of them. Jesus tells it to people this way, that we're not supposed to fear what man can do to us, right? Why? What's the worst thing they can do to you? They can kill you. That's what they can crucify. That's terrible, but that's the worst. You see, we'll be in eternity with God. And when we only see this life, and that's it, then we don't see what's to come with the Lord, and God saying, look, I can destroy a soul. Man can only destroy the flesh. And so, anyways, what he's pointing out here is that when we think of the world and their power, what they can do is bad, but remember, God wins, and that's the point on this one. Now, while you're in chapter 6, I want to read to you a verse from chapter number 1. And, in fact, I'd encourage you to even turn there. But Zechariah, if you have not found Zechariah, if you know where the New Testament starts with Matthew, Mark, Luke, go back just 2 books to the book of Zechariah. But in Zechariah chapter 1, in verse number 15, there's the first vision, the first prophecy that's given of the man that is riding a red horse. And then there's a bunch of other horses, or horsemen back there, that are also riding horses, and they're speckled with red. And so they have red on them, but they're not fully red, whereas the man riding the horse is riding a fully red horse. And anyways, we see a few indications in regards to what that means. The executor of judgment, the one that's going to be accomplishing his will. But notice what it says here in regards to what God's view of what's taking place with Jerusalem being not what it's supposed to be, being kind of under the control of other nations, and being where people have really done harm to the people back then. In verse number 15, it says, I am very sore displeased. Now, this is God saying this. I am very sore displeased with the heathen that are at ease. For I was but a little displeased, and they helped forward the affliction. And so what he says here, look, I was upset with them, and that was chastening the Jews because of their rejection of me and the idolatry and their unwillingness to allow the Sabbath rest of the land. So I allowed this, and they forwarded this. They accomplished this, but they went too far is the idea. They forwarded the affliction. They made it worse than it should have been. They were supposed to take them out of here, but they did it too much. And because of this, God says, I'm very displeased, and I'm displeased that they're at ease. The idea here is somebody that's committed a crime, and they've gotten away with it. And God Almighty is saying, look, I'm not happy that they think it's okay. And so this is what's leading in then to the following 7 of these things, in which he's going to explain this is the plan. So the first vision is that God is going to, by the person of what I believe in chapter 1 being Jesus Christ, going to execute his judgment and his plan. And he's going to explain it through the next several visions. The next one in chapter 1 was about the carpenters, and then about the horns that will be that did a work of removing, but they'll eventually be stopped. Very vague, but kind of give a broader outlook on it. And then, anyways, when you see it, the next few, it's leading into what he's doing. And it climaxes like a story would, where it starts with a problem and it gets worse, but it demonstrates the great power of God all the way until he finally executes it there at the very end in chapter 8. So this kind of a picture of what's going to happen, the prophetic timeline, which we'll see repeated really throughout the book of Zechariah as we get towards the end of the entire book. But anyway, several other visions are given. There's the measuring of Jerusalem, the idea of the completion, the plan that he has for what is going to be taking place. Jerusalem will be the capital of the work of God in the future. When we've described the millennium, it's described as that location, in that place. This is the location, this is the people, this is what he has in store for it. And so as he's getting ready for this, he measures and says, I've got a plan, and it's going to take place. We go on to the following chapter. Chapter 3 would be Joshua the high priest. What he describes is that the location, the people is not sufficient. Literally, it would require then the changing of the robes, the idea of the justification. I went through that one as far as the robes of the priests, of the people were too spotted, which, by the way, any spot would mean that they could not be a part of this to inherit these promises. And so what this means is they had to put on the new one that God would give them. The brand new, we're pointing to the robes that Jesus Christ would pay the purity of and give to them, and they would put that on. The next chapter, so that's the justification, the doctrine of justification. Salvation necessary is a requirement to enter into this new city. The next one is going to be the candlestick, which had a ceaseless source of oil, which oil would continue to pour from the trees to the lamps that would go to these candlesticks, or to the bowl that goes to these candlesticks, and just continue to provide the light, which is what they were supposed to be. But it's not by might, not by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. In other words, I'm going to do this. You just have to be the vessel that's willing. After that was the flying scroll. Now, I look at the candlestick and I'm like, that's not that weird. The flying scroll, that's weird. Just as far as the vision, but obviously it was pointing to something that was very important, and that's the judgment. That was the curse to the whole world, which is the law of God, which also means the curse. It's going to demonstrate there's a judgment that's needed there. And anyways, we see that, as well as the woman in the basket in that one, which is Babylon, Mystery Babylon. All that's going to take place, the judgment that's going to take place, being moved over to Babylon itself. So all the wickedness will be consolidated to a place, which is Babylon, which will rise up as a great nation, except it will be destroyed. So what they're doing is consolidating to a single place where God can destroy them. And so anyways, we'll see that back in the previous chapter. But now we get to chapter number 6. And chapter 6 is going to be the next one, which has to do with 4 horses, chariots, a couple mountains, and then he's going to go on to explain, like, this is what we're going to do about it, okay? So what I'm going to do, as far as the plan is, I'm going to read all 15 verses, and then we're going to go through verse by verse and go through what this all means. I will say on these things, there are some points where there's some ambiguity, and you might say, well, Pastor, I disagree with you on this or that. One of the ones that, if you really study this out, you may think that the 4 horsemen are something very specific, and that'll be fine if you disagree with me. It's just difficult for me to put some of these pieces together, and you'll understand what I'm saying. But the other parts would be about what the mountains are, the mountains of brass. What are those? What's this valley? I think ultimately we'll probably come to similar conclusions. A few non-negotiables are the branch, who the branch is, because we've talked about that in chapters past, where the branch is Jesus Christ. The branch that's going to, surely the throne of David, that tree has been cut down to a little stub, but there's a branch that will proceed. It's not completely gone. Christ has preserved that line, which is he himself, and he is the branch. So he's going to do what he said he would do. Again, we'll talk about that. And then a few others that you might say, well, this would be good insight or whatever. That's great as well. So I will give a little flexibility. There's a few, like the whole justification thing in chapter 3, too obvious, way too obvious. But anyways, in this one, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to read first 15, and then we'll go first 15 verses, and then we'll go back verse by verse. And I turned and lifted up mine eyes and looked, and behold, there came 4 chariots out from between 2 mountains, and the mountains were mountains of brass. And in the first chariot were red horses, and in the second chariot black horses, and in the third chariot white horses, and in the fourth chariot grizzled and bay horses. Then I answered and said unto the angel that talked with me, What are these, my Lord? And the angel answered and said unto me, These are the 4 spirits of the heavens, which go forth from standing before the Lord of all the earth. The black horses which are therein go forth into the north country, and the white go forth after them, and the grisled go forth toward the south country. And the bay went forth and sought to go, that they might walk to and fro through the earth. And he said, Get you hence, walk to and fro through the earth. So they walked to and fro through the earth. Then cried he upon me, and spake unto me, saying, Behold, these that go toward the north country have quieted my spirit in the north country. And the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Take of them of the captivity, even of Heldai, of Tobijah and Jediah, which are come from Babylon, and come thou the same day, and go into the house of Josiah, the son of Zephaniah. Then take silver and gold, and make crowns, and set them upon the head of Joshua, the son of Josedech, the high priest, the same one from chapter 3. And speak unto him, saying, Thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, saying, Behold, the man whose name is the branch, and he shall grow up out of his place, and he shall build the temple of the Lord. Even he shall build the temple of the Lord, and he shall bear the glory, and shall sit and rule upon his throne. And he shall be a priest upon his throne, and the counsel of the peace shall be between them both. And the crowns shall be to Helem, and to Tobijah, and to Jediah, and to Hen the son of Zephaniah, for a memorial in the temple of the Lord. And they that are far off shall come and build in the temple of the Lord, and ye shall know that the Lord of hosts hath sent me unto you, and this shall come to pass if ye will diligently obey the voice of the Lord your God. Let's take a moment to pray, and then we'll go quickly through this passage. Lord God, I thank you for this, and I thank you for what you're going to do and what you have done. Lord, I know that there's much that we can gain from this, and truly we could spend till the midnight hour, I'm sure, just going through details of all this. And I'm praying you'd give me wisdom to allow the brevity that's necessary, and as well as the detail that's necessary to help everyone that's here to be encouraged in a way that oftentimes we don't necessarily want encouragement. Lord, it's the simple manner that truly you're still in control. You are in charge. You are going to accomplish your will, Lord, and there's nothing that's getting past you. So, Lord, we thank you for what you've provided here this evening. Give wisdom, Father, as we seek it from you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so going through this, you find a number of things that can be kind of confusing. Really, the first portion of it is verses 1 through 8, which is going to be the last of these 8 visions. So anyways, in this vision, what you see is there's an image that takes place. He looks, and when he sees it, he sees a big old mountain. It's actually 2 mountains that are somewhat near each other. Apparently, based on Zechariah 14, we'd see that there's actually great divide between them, so a large valley. But these 2 big mountains, he sees them. And by the way, those big 2 mountains, he says that those are mountains of brass. And so the question is, does it mean that they are like metal, shiny mountains that he sees formed there? It's possible. I'll give you some thoughts on that in a little bit. But anyways, from there's a valley obviously running between them, and there's 4 chariots that come running through. And there's 4 chariots. As these 4 chariots come, there's a black chariot. So there's a chariot with a black horse, and then there's a chariot with a white horse, and there's a chariot with a red horse, and then there's one more chariot with which are grisled and bay. And so they come through, and again, we're like, what's grisled and bay? All right, we'll get to it. And so anyways, it comes through. He describes that these are going to go out, and what's going to happen is they're going to take off from there. We're going to find of those 4 chariots that 2 of those chariots head north. The black chariot heads north, and the white chariot follows behind. So black chariot goes first, white chariot follows. Then the grisled and the bay go south, and so that's it. So you might ask, well, what about east and west? Well, nothing is mentioned there, except for there's some aspect where the bay is running around. So apparently it's kind of going everywhere. And so you know that there's horse going south as well as running around there. By the way, with these, it seems that there may be multiple of these horses, kind of like in chapter number 1 when you have the red horse and multiple horses. Seems to be kind of the same idea. In fact, there's probably a lot of chariots, but they're represented by these 4 colors. It's also possible that in the 4th chariot, grisled and bay horses, that this chariot has several different horses that are going to be kind of divided in what they accomplish, and we'll speculate on some of those things in just a moment. And so the question then is, what are all these things? Okay, so the good thing about this is that when we read Zechariah, Zechariah has the same response that I think many of you and I would have. I don't know what this means. And that's basically the idea. He goes through and he answers the same thing as all of us would do in verse number 4. Then I answered and said unto the angel that talked with me, what are these, my Lord? I'm like, what's going on here? Sounds good. And by the way, he's been out this 7 times now, so like one more. Like I don't know what that one is either. You know, you kind of hope like next one, like I got this one. Nope, I don't understand. I have no idea what's going on. And the idea here, I love the way God does this because he expresses a vision that he knows, and it'll give you a clue as far as what's going on, and it gives you a picture of what's going on, but it doesn't give you sight to be able to see perfectly the way God sees it. He's basically saying, trust me, this is what's happening, and I'm going to give you a glimpse into this. You know that I've got things under control, but you're not going to see all the details of how this is going to play out. And it's basically, he's just giving him a token of what's going to be taking place in the future. So a few thoughts on this. We first off want to start off with the horses. Actually, let's start off with the... let's start with the horses. I'm sorry, the chariots. In chapter 6, it does say 4 chariots. Chapter 1 has horsemen. And so there's a slight distinction, and it's a unique distinction. One of the things about it is oftentimes horsemen, we oftentimes consider them to be like armored horses. In fact, I've seen pictures where people have tried to depict Zechariah or Revelation 6 or Zechariah 1, and they show these horses that are like clad in armor and have stirrups and like knights on top. Well, that wouldn't have fit the picture at all, simply because, for one thing, stirrups didn't exist for them. There's some cases that people say that the Assyrians may have had some kind of stirrups, but the reality is they were very different. In fact, based on what we know of history, the Indians, like from India, had some kind of stirrups just after this time, around 300 BC, that literally you would just put your toe into. And so not a very comfortable way of riding a horse, I'd imagine, and definitely not if you're in warfare. And so anyways, they were not typically used in warfare unless they were being used for scouting or for leading. So let's just say like you're a leader and you're going to have people following you. Then you would ride the horse while everybody else walked. Infantry would walk behind you. And so anyways, so horsemen there were cavalry charges, but they were in different ways. In fact, some cases you'll find a lot, and I've studied more on this probably than I need to, but they had cavalry charges where you would literally have 2 people on each horse. And so one guy could drive the horse, or ride. What would you call it? You're the expert. Ride. You could ride. They're both riding, so I don't know who's... Okay, so the guy, the front rider, is controlling the horse, and then the guy in the back's got a spear or bow and arrow, because you can imagine if you don't have stirrups, shooting bow and arrows is kind of challenging. It wasn't quite bareback. Some of them put like blankets or small equivalents to saddles back then, but that was pretty much it. And so anyways, this is more a sign of leadership as far as things that were going to happen. It wasn't necessarily an attack vehicle. The difference, though, is this is chariots. So in this chapter, it's different because these are chariots, which were, without any question, these were instruments of war. This would have been a very expensive item. In fact, oftentimes, in some of the scripture stories we'll find, even made out of brass, which is incredibly heavy. It would have not been pulled by one horse. It would have had multiple horses pulling it. And anyways, these were designed as instruments of war. This would have been we can equate it to a tank today. Okay, these are very powerful tools, and you didn't want to get in the way. For one thing, it wasn't one horse. You couldn't move out of the way. You'd have this thing pulled by 2 and 4 horses with this massive, very heavy chariot of brass that would weigh hundreds, if not 1,000 pounds, and it's pulling people, typically more than one person. And so anyways, these chariots that are coming through, these are instruments of war, and so they're described specifically that way. And so anyways, there are 4 colors that are going to be mentioned. There's a red, black, white, and gristled, and bay. So the 4th chariot seems to have horses that are both gristled and bay, not necessarily gristled bay horses. The term bay nowadays is pretty standard in our vocabulary. How many of you know what a bay horse is? One of my favorite horses, by the way. They're beautiful horses. I've made bay, like not like real bay horses, but like I've carved out bay horses. And they're like it's going to be a brown horse with like a black mane of hair and black tail. Beautiful horses. But that's not historically what bay has always meant, especially like when the King James translators wrote bay. There's some question in regards to what it means. The other thing is, and we will look at Revelation 6 in a moment, but in Revelation 6, when it describes 4 horses, there's not a bay horse. That's not one of them. It's a pale. Thank you, I appreciate it. The pale horse, which would not be a brown horse with a black mane and tail, right? That's very different than pale. but it would be more similar probably to what the word gristled is. The word gristled would be basically spotted, but it wouldn't be like an American paint horse, for instance. It would have like small spots, usually grayish in nature. Today we would call that a dapple horse. And I don't know if you're familiar with what that means, but basically it's mostly it's gray, but it's got like dark spots around. They're beautiful horses, some of my favorites as well. I really like. So the last chariots, those have been the coolest horses, I think. So anyways, that's what you have there. The bay horses can possibly be a pale, but it seems to be more so on the type of horse it was than it was just in the physical appearance. As far as that's what the term is more in reference to. So anyways, so if you disagree with me on that point, I don't know that I can argue with you. All right, so I've looked and I've looked and I've looked and I don't know. I don't speak Hebrew well enough apparently to understand horse terminology in Hebrew. Okay, that's not been a major study of mine in the past. But we do know what a black horse is. We know what a white horse is. And we know what a red horse is. We're pretty sure, and gristled actually is pretty well described as well. So anyways, these are the horses that are referenced. Now, if you want to hold your place there and turn to the book of Revelation for a moment, Revelation chapter number 6. I beat you there because I already had it marked. But Revelation chapter 6, the last book of the New Testament of the Bible, in chapter 6 is going to describe something that's going to be going on. Now, this is important in the way it's being described because it's very similar to Zechariah 6 as well. Because Zechariah 6 is culminating 8 visions of human history as far as how God is going to exact his judgment. And so in Revelation 6 is going to be in a very similar manner, not exactly the same. You'll see the function, the order, what's taking place is going to be different. But I think there are some things that we can take from it as far as what these horses actually represent. Now in chapter number 6, look at verse number 2, and this has to do with Jesus himself that's going to be opening up the seals. In verse number 2, and I saw and behold a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. So this is the first one of the 7 seals, which is the conquering and victorious one, which is the white horse that's going to go forward. So we understand the symbolism there in regards to the white horse, what he's doing. Go down to verse number 4, and there went out another horse that was red. Now you notice the pattern is already different. The other one starts with black and white. This one starts with white and then red. So anyways, we'll go down to verse number 4. And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him. Notice what the intention was. That sat thereon to take peace from the earth, that they should kill one another. And there was given unto him a great sword. And so this one seems to demonstrate the aspect that there is going to be war. This would be obviously very, very bad. But, sorry, I'm trying to catch up on my notes here. So anyway, so you have the red one. This has to do with warfare and violence that's going to be taken over. Go down to verse number, so anyways, verse 4 has given him a great sword. Warfare, verse number 5, and when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, come and see. And I beheld, and lo, a black horse, and he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. This is going to have to do with famine or the lack of availability of food. We'll find that in the next verse, where there's balances on his hand, and basically food is very, very expensive, like a year's worth of food, or a year's worth of income for a piece of bread type thing. And so anyways, these are or a whole day's worth for one piece of bread. All this type of stuff that it's talking about has to do specifically with famine or the lack of availability of food. And so that's what it's representing there. Then go down a couple verses to verse number 8 and the last horse there. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse on the 4th seal. And his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed him, and power was given unto them over the 4th part of the earth, to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. And so this is kind of a culmination of all of them, except for technically he's going forth conquering with victory, but it's coming at the great expense of famine and death and peril and plague. And so all sorts of stuff is going really, really bad when this pale horse shows up. So again, there's a couple of differences, though. One is that these are the specific horsemen. There's a distinction from Zechariah chapter 6 to Zechariah 1 from a horseman to chariots. Also, the locations are also very important, but I do believe the greatest thing we can draw from them is the significance of the horses themselves, as far as what they're telling us about that. What we do find as they're heading up there, that based on some of the things we'll find in this chapter, is that once the horses are going to take off, they're going to accomplish the work of God. Now, before we get to what they're going to be accomplishing, in verse 1, it does mention also there's going to be something that takes place, and that's going to be that these horse chariots are coming from between two mountains. We would call that a valley, right? We would go through a valley. Now, in Jerusalem, Jerusalem itself is built upon a mountaintop. Technically, it's kind of like three ridges of a mountaintop, and so three mountaintops. Mount Zion would be a part of it. In fact, it's probably the most popular part there. And anyways, in that area there, once you would go out past the city, you would go down the valley, what we would call the Kidron Valley, and you go up through to the next mountaintop. That would be the Mount of Olives, or Mount Olivet. And so you have both of those mountaintops, and so you have a valley between them. Interesting thing about history, and I actually just learned about this today. I had finished studying. I'm like, I'm going to just look at a couple things. And I looked up some information about the Kidron Valley, and I found something, and it seems to be found in a number of sources. I don't study Islam or anything like that. So anyways, but it said that in regards to the Kidron Valley, the Christians, the Muslims, and the Jews have historically held the Kidron Valley to be the place of the final judgment. So it's kind of like, well, they all kind of agree on that. And so the Kidron Valley is actually filled with a whole bunch of cemeteries. There's a bunch of cemeteries down there because the idea is they want to be close there when there's judgment. Now, the bad news about that part is that you'll just be closer to when that judgment comes if you're not saved. And that's going to be really bad. So anyways, all that is describing that. But this is largely taken from this passage because these chariots of war are coming through what we describe these two mountains that are mountains of brass. The idea of brass mountains would be that these are places of judgment. And the concept would be found in a few different places. If you're in Zechariah, you can go back a little bit to the book of Joel. And back in Joel chapter 3, it describes a little bit that I believe is talking about this specific valley or these two mountains. In Joel chapter 3, it describes more. And in regards to, I'm sorry, I'm almost there. Okay, Joel, Amos. All right. Joel chapter number 3 will describe a little bit more about this, and I know I'm going to lose you all here in a moment. But anyways, it says in verse number 1, Joel chapter 3, verse number 1, "For behold, in those days and in that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem." In other words, when they have been captive and they're going to be brought back. So people automatically say, well, this is only talking about their captivity in Babylon back then, except for notice what's going to happen. "I will also gather all nations and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land." Now, from the book of Joel, there was a regathering. That's what we find there in the book of Zechariah, except for this is something that didn't happen. There was never a point in history where all the nations were gathered there to the valley of Jehoshaphat, which we'll get to in a second. There's never that point that kind of thing did take place, but he says the reason for this because this is my house, this is my place, and you guys scattered my people everywhere, so now there's time for judgment. Beyond that, he's going to explain here that this will include all the nations, and then if you go down to verse number 9, he says, "Proclaim ye this among the Gentiles. Prepare war, wake up the mighty men, let all the men of war draw near, let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. Assemble yourselves and come, all ye heathen, and gather yourselves together round about. Thither cause thy mighty ones to come down, O Lord. Let the heathen be wakened and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, for there will I sit to judge all the heathen round about. Put ye in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Get you down, for the press is full. The fats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision." Now, so he mentions two valleys there, valley of Jehoshaphat, valley of decision. And then there, verses 9 through 14 really is the taunting. All right, all you mighty warriors of the heathen lands who have rejected the Lord, go ahead. Come on. All right, it's time. Go ahead. Bring your mightiest, bring your biggest weapons. I mean, you sharpen those swords. You get everything ready, and you come to see us. And then he says, by the way, God, go ahead. We brought him here. You do your thing. You spread your sickle, which the book of Revelation is actually going to describe that type of judgment that's going to take place specifically. And so anyways, when this happens, he describes it taking place in a valley which is called the Valley of Jehoshaphat. Now, here's a problem with the Valley of Jehoshaphat. There's no such thing. There's not anywhere in the Scriptures are you going to find the Valley of Jehoshaphat. Nowhere historically. There's no map that you're going to find, oh, there's the Valley of Jehoshaphat. It doesn't exist. In fact, the Valley of Decision, which is mentioned the same thing, is actually referring to the same thing we were just talking about earlier. He just calls it Valley of Jehoshaphat, Valley of Decision. The idea of the Valley of Decision, there's a very famous message preached by Jerry Falwell a number of years back where he preaches it to the graduates of Liberty University saying now is the time of your Valley of Decision where you've got to go make decisions. Here's the problem. That means you're going to get judged and you're going to be destroyed. You don't want to be in the Valley of Decision. That's a bad place to be because when you're gathered there, he's going to take a sickle and wipe them all out. In fact, the Bible describes clearly how this is going to take place. And so the concept here is that this is a place of judgment. And so when the chariots are passing through this valley, this location is describing mountains in which he's going to be taking his place. Zechariah chapter number 14 describes it in further detail as when, and I won't read it right now, but when Jesus Christ will return, that he will set his foot there on the Mount of Olives, and it will split and create a very great valley. And so not only do you have Mount Olivet there, the Mount of Olives, you will also have Mount Zion, who is now being very separated. And it's almost as if God says, all right, let's make some extra space for all the wicked of the earth to have a place for them to be judged. And it describes that he will sit on his throne and he will judge them. Now, Jesus Christ has yet to sit on his throne here on earth. He has yet to judge all the nations. And so here's what we know from this. This is in the future. This has not happened yet. And so anyways, that's a lot of information. I encourage you to keep looking on that. Zechariah 14, 1 through 3 is where you'll find that. Verse 4 really amplifies that part. But by the way, the word Jehoshaphat means Jehovah judges. That's the valley of Jehoshaphat. Jehovah judges in that valley. And so anyways, we see about the horses, what they're going to be doing. In this passage there in Zechariah 6, it describes the two of them go forth. The black one, which when from Revelation 6 we saw it represents a famine, the limited food supply, the great death that's taken place everywhere. The white one would be the conquering that takes place victoriously. And the answer to when they go north, we find that in verse number 8. Then cried he upon me and spake unto me, saying, Behold, these that go toward the north country have quieted my spirit in the north country. So what he's pointing out here is in chapter number 1, everybody's quiet. Everybody's at ease. Everything's going great. And God says, I'm not happy with this. So you go through several visions all the way to the 8th vision when he says, all right, now I'm going to send my spirits, and he describes 4 spirits that came from him. They're the spirits of God that stood before God, and they went forth, and when they went up to the north country, then God says, all right, it's good. This is exactly what was needed. Same way that you would see it in the book of Revelation, where the angels would describe that Jesus Christ is righteous to pour out his wrath on them. This is good. And he was saying, spirit's quieted. In other words, I wasn't happy until I took care of that stuff that was needing to be taken care of. And so this is a time of judgment, of great difficulty, of the Bible word tribulation as far as great difficulty. These are things that are happening here that are exactly as God has planned. He is going to create a great deal of havoc there for the rest of the world. Now, beyond that, one other question that comes up to mind. What are the Griswold and Bay doing? Well, there's a couple of questions that come to mind for me. When you think about the Griswold horses going south, is that Israel, as far as where they're at, they've been invaded always by the north and by the south. They've had over 60 invasions, which is a lot of invasions for a single country. And anyways, but none have ever come from the east because there's a mountain range there that's honestly just miserable and too difficult. In fact, in the book of Daniel, we saw that those that escape from Jerusalem are going to go into the mountains and that the man of sin will actually never overcome that part. But then there's also the Mediterranean, which is possible technically to invade from there, but it's such a vast coastline, it's easily shot down just from higher points in Jerusalem and other areas. And so anyways, the north and south has been basically every single invasion, both from Egypt as well as from the north with Babylon, Assyria, the Syrian governments and stuff like that have come through. So anyways, the southern ones going south, they kind of take care of business, and the Bay horses says that it went everywhere throughout the whole world and did the rest of the job is the idea. And so anyways, all of that's to say this. He summarizes it with this. I'm happy now that I've done exactly what I said I would do. The angel says that the spirit is quieted in the north country. It's all taken care of. Here's the point. It seems like the world's winning. It seems like Babylon's in charge. It seems like the world will overcome the Lord and God, his plan. And God says, no, I've got a plan. It's all in design. I know exactly what I'm doing. You don't have to worry about it. For them back then, this would have been a very encouraging thing. Why? Well, because they got to build a temple. The temple's incredibly important. And the temple is going to be built to a people that are a weak people. They don't even own their own land. They're in the underneath the Medo-Persian Empire, and they're kind of just doing what they're allowed to do. And they have a lot of opposition. They're surrounded by enemies, and they're told to build this temple which is quite ornate, full of gold and gems and jewels and all sorts of expensive stuff that they're going to put on display without any protection around it. They're going to put up this very shiny thing on top of this mountain where everybody can see, and they're like, I don't know that we really want to, and we have other things we got to do. And so ultimately what he's encouraging them is this: I win. You don't have to worry about the enemies. Just do what I told you. I win. Here's my plan. Practically, if you look down to verse number 9, and the word of the Lord came unto me, take of them of the captivity, even Heldiah and Tobijah and Jediah, which are come from Babylon, and come thou the same day, and go into the house of Josiah the son of Zephaniah. Then take silver and gold, and make crowns, and set them upon the head of Joshua the son of Josedek, the high priest. So what we have here now is he says, go to these three guys, and I want you to go to them who have come from Babylon, and they have some gold and silver, and I want you to get a hold of that gold and silver. Take that gold and silver, and I'm going to want you to go to Josiah's house, and you're going to take this, and you're going to take the gold and silver, and you're going to make some crowns. We know it's going to be at least 3 crowns that are going to be mentioned. I believe 2 or 3. We'll find out in a second. I have some bad notes. I have both numbers. But anyways, there's going to be some crowns that are going to be made. And anyways, what he wants you to do is I want you to take those crowns, and I want you to put them on top of Joshua, who is not a king. He is not Zerubbabel. He is the high priest. Now, there's something unusual about this, isn't it? Priests don't wear crowns. Priests, they have the fine mitre, which is, it has on the front of it says, holy before the Lord. In other words, it's like a banner saying, I'm right with God. All right, this is what it's saying. It's purely for the Lord and sanctified for him. But they're saying, take the high priest and put some crowns on him. Now, why is that? Well, Joshua at this point, not the same Joshua from the book of Joshua, but the high priest here is going to he's going to be a stand-in. He's going to be a picture, an illustration for people to see that God has a plan. God has a plan that he's going to accomplish, and we're going to see it here with the stand-in, which is going to be Joshua. And so he is representing what is going to be said here. Verse 12, and speak unto him, saying, thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, saying, behold the man whose name is the branch, Jesus, and he shall grow up out of his place, and he shall build the temple of the Lord. Even he shall build the temple of the Lord, and he shall bear the glory, and shall sit and rule upon his throne. And he shall be a priest upon his throne, and the counsel of peace shall be between them both. And so what he tells them here is that Joshua is going to be representing something that's going to happen in the future. A couple things about it. One is that this is going to be someone named the branch. Someone named the branch, which is important because that means specifically he's going to bear the name, the line of King David specifically, which has been promised would be on the throne forever. So this is the branch. Verse number 12 would indicate the fact that he's going to come out of his own place. He will grow out of his own place. In other words, from here. This isn't going to be a foreigner that's going to come in and take over and make everything good. It's very important because there will be someone in the future that's going to come in, and he's going to establish the covenant with them. But he's saying, no, this guy's from right here. He's raised here. He's going to grow up here. In the book of Luke, it's going to describe that he grew in wisdom and in favor and stature, stature and favor with God and man. Thank you. It was slightly off. So he grows right there. This is what he does, and this is what's going to take place, which means there's going to be a humanity to him, that Jesus Christ is fully God, but he's also fully man. Also, he will do something. He's going to have a job. He's going to, according to verse number 12, he shall build the temple of the Lord. That's something he's going to do. Now, big problem here with this one. He's putting the crowns on Joshua and saying, hey, somebody's coming in the future and they're going to build the temple. I'm thinking, well, I'm not building it then. Somebody else is going to do it. Why am I going to do it ahead of time? But he's pointing out to something that will be built in the future. Now, they're in the middle of a building project saying, do this. But in light of the fact of the one that's going to build the temple of the Lord, the big one, the new one. Now, a couple thoughts on what that temple would be. There's an aspect of spiritual temple, for instance, in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. What? Know ye not that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost, which is in you, which you have of God, and ye are not your own, for ye are bought with a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. What? Know ye not that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost? And so there's that aspect of the temples there. We know there's been several temples in history. There's Solomon's temple. There was Zerubbabel's temple, which is about to be built in this passage. There's Herod's temple that's going to come. That's where the temple is around during the life of Christ. There's going to be a temple during the time of tribulation that's going to be desecrated, the abomination of desolations. And then in Ezekiel chapter 40 describes a final temple that gives dimensions. It's going to be bigger, and it's going to be made by God himself, by Jesus Christ, who is going to make the final temple, and it's going to be bigger. Now, the full functions on that and the study and all that, that's a whole different discussion, okay? So we're not going to get into all that as far as why that's there. But when as far as that being there, it describes something that's going to happen. In fact, the book of Ezekiel was written before this. And yet, with all those dimensions, they don't build that. And God says in the book of Ezekiel chapter 40, this is something that's going to be done. And so we know this is going to happen in the future. And why? We'll have the discussion at another time when we get to the book of Ezekiel. Or if you ask me. And anyways, with that, that's going to be something that's going to take place. He's saying, I'm going to take care of that myself. But he will build the temple of the Lord. And then, of course, it's going to say some very other important things. In verse number 13, he shall build the temple of the Lord. He shall bear the glory. The idea is that he will come in the glory of God. He is going to be ruling and reigning in glory. He will be a king with a throne. So he's going to be the king. That's why he gets crowns, but then he will be a priest sitting in his throne. And so it combines now the office of priest and king, which is something that does not happen in the Old Testament, with one exception. Now, ultimately, we see Saul King Saul gets just tired of waiting for the sacrifice to be done when he's waiting for Samuel to come to a sacrifice back in the book of 1 Samuel. And so he's going to offer the sacrifice to God. God says no, he loses the kingdom for it. Later on, you find Uzziah in 2 Chronicles 26, where Uzziah is going to go burn incense unto the Lord in the temple. And they stop him. The high priest basically says, get out of here. And all the other priests line up and say, no way. He gets leprosy and is a leper for the rest of his life because of it. God was not okay with mixing the offices of king and priest. The only time that's going to be something that takes place is all the way back in Genesis when Abraham goes and he talks to a certain guy named Melchizedek, who is the king of Salem, who receives tithes, and he is the priest of the Most High God. So king and priest. Now, the point on this one is that when it comes to Saul and all the other kings, they cannot be king and priests. They can't do that. So the priests during that time are all what we would call the Aaronic, not ironic, but Aaronic priesthood from the line of Aaron. And Melchizedek has a completely different thing going on. And so what the Bible in the book of Hebrews chapter number 5 says is that Jesus Christ himself comes after the order of Melchizedek. The idea here is not Aaronic, where he's tied only to be priest, but he's king and he's priest. So Jesus Christ is this. Ultimately, we also find at the end of verse number 13, and the counsel of peace shall be between them both, between king and priest, all unified. See, king and priest, having that separated, made sure that there was a lot of problems that weren't being taken advantage of. In our country, we have three separate branches of government, right? All right, you can read into what I'm saying there. But anyways, the idea here is checks and balances. We all just make sure the other one's not trying to take advantage of it. That was the plan. And so anyways, that's the sin nature we're trying to come up against. Whereas when it comes to Christ, when he is king and priest, there's going to be complete peace. The counsel of peace shall be between both of them, that those offices that he himself will bear together. And so, in verse 14 it says, these crowns, you make them and you give them to these people here. I don't know if there's two or there's three. I know there's more than one, but there's three people mentioned, which makes it seem that there's three crowns. And so anyways, there's these crowns that are going to be given to these people. And he says to do this, according to the end of verse 14, for a memorial in the temple of the Lord. In other words, they said, build a temple and put these three crowns in there, which will remind you of the one that's going to build the final temple, all right? In other words, you're going to build something. It's not even the final one. And so he's telling you to go ahead and do this. The point of this is a constant reminder of the fact that there is a coming king. Can I tell you something? Back then, they knew that Jesus was coming. They knew it. And he's demonstrating it here. You might say, well, there's a lot of ambiguity in the visions. You don't have to understand all the visions. In fact, the visions are not allegory. Not every single word means something uniquely. He's telling you a broad story so that way you can know something. The king is coming. They know this. This is something that's going to take place, and it describes them in detail. Listen, this is powerful stuff. And then verse 15 is just awesome. All right, verse 15 is great. And they that are far off shall come and build in the temple of the Lord. The word build, the phrase build in the temple of the Lord doesn't mean that they're going to build a temple. Why do we know that? Well, because in verse 12 and 13, this one that's coming is going to build the temple. But in verse 15, they're going to build. The idea is they're going to work in the temple of the Lord. Now, this is important because people from afar off aren't allowed to work in the temple. In fact, specifically to work in the temple, you have to be of the right family, of the right tribe. You have to be a Levite. And you couldn't just be a Levite. You even had to have a bent nose. What a lot of people would describe as a Jewish nose, the bent nose. You even had to have a Jewish nose, a bent nose, in order to work there. So you had to very uniquely be there. But then he says, look, when this one comes, those that were far off, they will build in the temple of the Lord. Let's work there. It reminds me of Ephesians chapter 2, verse 13. But now in Christ Jesus, ye who were sometimes far off are made nigh by the blood of Christ. Listen, when this happens, he's bringing them all in. Isn't that good? And so he puts all this back then. So when they get to the book of Acts, they're like, wait a second, Gentiles are receiving the gospel? Yeah, go to Zechariah. They said this is going to happen. All right, this is what's going to be taking place. And anyways, they that were far off shall come and build in the temple of the Lord, and ye shall know that the Lord of hosts hath sent me unto you, and this shall come to pass if ye will diligently obey the voice of the Lord your God. I don't want to minimize what he says at the very end, but he points out that, yes, those that were afar off, Gentiles in other words, will serve in the temple of the Lord. Also you, as long as you're doing what you're supposed to, you'll serve as well. Not that you won't be a part of it. If you're saved, you'll be a part of it, but the work in the temple of the Lord is going to be dependent on your work here. The idea here is simply this. You'll go to heaven if you're saved, but what you'll be doing for eternity is going to be based on, according to what he says here, obey the voice of the Lord your God. That's what he's telling you. And so anyways, this incredible passage. I love that in the midst of all these visions, he summarizes it with this: Jesus is coming, and he wins. So build the temple. Do what you're supposed to. All right, let's go ahead and we'll pray a little later than normal on a Wednesday night, but I felt it was important to put that into all one message. Lord, I thank you so much for this passage and for what you've instructed us in here. Pray that we'd be more knowledgeable about this, more so for the fact that we can have greater faith that regardless of what's going on in this world, Lord, you're coming. You're coming again. Lord, I'm thankful for the fact that Christ will